Everything is ready in Peru ahead of today's presidential runoff between candidates Pedro Castillo and Keiko Fujimori. The National Strike Committee has announced its willingness to hold talks with the Colombian government. Finance ministers from the G7 nations group accord a tax rate targeting tech giants and multinationals. We start in Peru, where everything is set up ahead of today's presidential elections. The National Office of Electoral Processes has started the distribution of more than 380 tons of electoral material to Capital Lima and Callao ahead of the presidential runoff between left-wing candidate Pedro Castillo and right-wing Keiko Fujimori. For this election, it is expected that Peruvian citizens, not only in the national territory but also abroad, will attend in a higher percentage than in the first round.
It is the most important deployment of electoral material for this second round. We have already deployed electoral material for abroad, for our 94 offices nationwide, and we have deployed the material for the most remote places.
Meanwhile, police and military personnel are guarding all polling stations across Peru to protect electoral material as the nation gears up for the general elections. More than 25 million people are registered to vote, which by law is obligatory. Large school units, community schools, and even the National Stadium in Capital Lima will be the main polling stations. The voting in consulates and embassies abroad has begun. Uncertainty has gripped this country ahead of what polls have predicted will be a very close race.
The atmosphere is very busy because of what is going to happen next. Let's hope it will be for the good. Let's vote for democracy. I'm a little calm, not afraid of anything else, because in the end, we still have to work day by day. Whoever wins should just do things right, because that's what we all Peruvians want, just do things right.
The National Jury of Elections of Peru informed that at least 150 international observers will accompany the presidential elections. The electoral authority specified that 99 observers will supervise the runoff elections in Peru, while 51 will do so from abroad. The largest number of participants was provided by the Organization of American States, with 34, followed by the Inter-American Union of Electoral Organizations, which assigned 20 observers. The rest of the delegation is made up of observers from the European Union, the Permanent Conference of Political Parties of Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Ecuadorian Human Rights Committee. Still in Peru, thousands of people took to the streets in several cities across the country to reject a possible administration led by the presidential candidate Keiko Fujimori, accused by the prosecutor's office of leading a criminal organization. Our correspondent Veronica Insausti has more information in the following report.
Days before the elections, thousands of citizens filled the main squares of their cities to reject the Peruvian state being taken over by a presidential candidate accused by the prosecutor's office of leading a criminal organization.
We will not allow a criminal to represent 35 million Peruvian workers. We don't want that government of the 90s, where there was no freedom of expression, where they suppressed all our rights. As a teacher, I know I have lived it. That is why I say Fujimori never again.
In the 90s, during the dictatorial government of Alberto Fujimori, corruption pervaded in all public institutions, and to date, it has been difficult to rebuild them.
Fujimorismo hijacked the state from the inside, seized public institutions and left corruption at every turn in each of these institutions that have been taken over once again, this time by various criminal organizations, on which the new Fujimorismo has also been established, which is the same Fujimorismo as always, but preaches new ideas and is represented by Mrs. Fujimori.
In Peru, the corruption included 6 former presidents who ruled during the last 30 years. 3 are still in prison and 1 committed suicide before being arrested. The business sector also colluded, and bribery became normal.
I believe that the entire political class is corrupt, especially from presidential spheres, but also in the economy, because we have had a business elite, the National Confederation of Private Businesses Institutions, committed to corruption, the Construction Club, buying parliamentary seats for their own benefit, with laws in their own name, as in the case of Dionisio Romero and the entire corporate group of the credit bank around the healthy food law. So, where are we at? This is the most critical situation in our Republican history, and today, to reaffirm its continuity is immoral.
In addition to the health, economic, and political crisis, there is a moral crisis eating away at the public and private sectors. The Peruvian people are crying out for radical and urgent change.
Verónica Insausti, TeleSUR, Perú.
And many farmers in Chota, northern Peru, say they feel they were forgotten by the government and hope the new elected president will offer greater support for rural residents. They're pinning their hopes on left-wing candidate Pedro Castillo winning the presidential elections and providing more economic support to rural farmers. 7 million of Peru's 33 million inhabitants live in the countryside, where the proportion of families living in poverty is higher than in urban areas.
Hopefully, the government that will take over this coming year will work for the people, because we see that many candidates sometimes talk about doing a lot for the country, but nothing has been done so far.
Pedro Castillo is a teacher who maybe doesn't have a master's degree in politics. He doesn't have in-depth knowledge of what the reality of the country is, what the international context is. But I think that's what advisors are for, right? They can advise him, but that can also be a setback due to his lack of experience.
I see Pedro Castillo as a very honest man. Since he is a teacher, he started from the bottom and worked really hard for social justice. And now, in case he wins the elections, he will work even harder for our people.
In Colombia, after 39 days of protests, the National Strike Committee reiterated its willingness to hold talks with the government. The committee held Iván Duque's government responsible for the slow progress in the talks, aimed at creating a sustainable scenario for negotiations on the country's future. According to the strike committee, an agreement has been reached on half of the issues on the proposed agenda: non-involvement of military forces in controlling protests, the autonomy of local governments to manage demonstrations, a ban on the use of firearms against protesters are among the main points in dispute. Still in Colombia, security forces continue with the violent repression of protesters. Public transportation facilities are reportedly being used as provisional detention centers. According to the media outlet Colombia Informa, in several sectors of capital Bogota, the mobile anti-riot squad attacked demonstrators and detained them in the bus stations. In Portal Suba, one of the main stations of the Transmilenio public transportation system of Bogota, police harassed journalists and human rights defenders who gathered around the area. This week, the Transmilenio company confirmed the allegations. 4 protesters were detained at Portal de Uva on May 19, while 10 others, including a woman, were detained at Portal Americas, according to a statement from the company. As the protest continues, more than 400 COVID-19 deaths were recorded in the last 24 hours in Colombia. Meanwhile, the Pan American Health Organization confirmed that the country registers the highest daily rate of infections in South America. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Colombia has registered more than 3.5 million cases of COVID-19 and over 90,000 deaths. Almost 30,000 new infections were diagnosed on Thursday as the nation faces a deep social and political crisis. According to this organization, Colombia has the highest infection rates since March 6, 2020, when the first case of COVID-19 was recorded. Despite the data, the government opened its borders this week, prompting protests from Panama and Venezuela. More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele has accused the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, of promoting impunity in the country. This comes after the designation as advisor to the General Secretary of Ernesto Munjon, a former mayor of San Salvador between 2018 and 2021, who faces 2 criminal proceedings. As a result, Bukele has decided to break the agreement with the OAS that created the International Commission Against Impunity and Corruption in El Salvador in 2019, and added that his government will seek support from the international community to install another commission to fight impunity and corruption. The Attorney General's office has accused Munchon of allegedly bribing criminal groups to obtain a great percentage of votes in the 2014 presidential elections.
They manage
the OAS-CCS, the International Commission Against Impunity and Corruption in El Salvador, and the Secretary General Luis Almagro grants impunity or tries to grant impunity to Ernesto Moixont, a Salvadoran criminal, as his advisor. One sees the OAS and the UN, and one sees the Secretary General of the OAS in Washington, and one thinks that these people are correct. Of course, when one enters into this and realizes that things are not as they seem, that the international community is mostly hypocritical and cynical and silent before great abuses of real human rights, where people are murdered in the street.
Syria's Kurds have handed 4 relatives of Islamic State group fighters, including 3 children, to Dutch diplomats for repatriation. The group consisted of a Dutch woman and her 2 children, as well as another 12-year-old girl. Top Syrian Kurdish foreign affairs official Abdel Karim Omar said this was a humanitarian case whose mother had agreed to her repatriation following a request from the Dutch government. Since the fall of the Islamic State's caliphate in March 2019, Syria's Kurds and the United Nations have urged foreign countries to repatriate their nationals held in the northeast Syria. At least 220 children with Dutch nationality remain in Syria or Turkey, 75% of whom are under the age of 4 and were born in the region to parents with Dutch citizenship.
Today we will hand to the Dutch government a woman and her 2 children. This woman is conforming with the autonomous administration's policy. When we do not have proof or evidence showing that women have committed crimes in this region, we can hand them over to their countries. We will also hand them a young girl. She has a mother, but this is a special humanitarian case. We agreed to hand her over to the Dutch government after obtaining written consent from her mother for her repatriation.
Finance ministers from wealthy G7 nations have endorsed a global corporate tax rate of at least 15%, rallying behind a US-backed plan targeting tech giants and other multinationals accused of not paying enough. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen hailed the unprecedented commitment, saying in a statement that a global minimum tax will end the race to the bottom in corporate taxation. Facebook even got behind the move, despite the social media giant facing the prospect of having to pay more tax, while non-governmental organizations said it wasn't enough. Following the 2-day gathering in London, the G7 said in a final statement that it will commit to a global minimum tax of at least 15% on a country-by-country basis.
The G7 has taken significant steps this weekend to end the existing harmful dynamic, making commitments today that provide tremendous momentum towards achieving a robust global minimum tax at a rate of at least 15%. That global minimum tax would end the race to the bottom in corporate taxation and ensure fairness for the middle class and working people in the U.S. and around the world.
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin blasted the United States for abusing the concept of national security and blacklisting Chinese companies.
The US government has generalized the concept of national security and abused state power to suppress and constrain Chinese companies by any possible means. China firmly opposes this. The US Act violates market principles, disrupts market rules and order, and harms the legitimate rights and interests of both Chinese enterprises and the investors from other countries, including the United States. China urges the US to respect market rules and principles, drop all kinds of so-called lists that suppress Chinese enterprises, and provide them with a fair, just, and non-discriminatory business environment. The Chinese government will take necessary measures to safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies.
The international airport in DR Congo's Goma reopens 2 weeks after a devastating volcanic eruption near the eastern city with the arrival of a plane carrying Prime Minister Jean-Michel Sama-Lukonde. I'm happy to finally be here in Goma to bring a message of support, the Prime Minister said. During a cabinet meeting on Friday, Sama-Lukonde said the country's scientists had observed a decline in volcanic activity in recent days. About 400,000 residents left the North Kivu provincial capital on May 22nd after the eruption of Mount Nyiragongo, one of the world's most active volcanoes, killing dozens of people and destroying 5,000 homes in the city of Goma.
We decided to come and bring a message of support to the population of Goma, which, beyond having their safety at risk, had to face this natural disaster that happened in an unpredictable way. And beyond that, I would also like to thank, as the head of the state has done, the compatriots who have been willing to welcome families who have found themselves in their homes. And today, as we have just arrived in Goma, we hope that we will continue to have better conditions and that this will allow the return of the displaced.
And we have more stories coming up after one last break, so stay with us. Welcome back. At least 20 African migrants remain missing a day after 2 boats sank off the coast of Tunisia, according to officials. The Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights has reported that scores of bodies have been found floating near the coast. 2 bodies have been so far recovered, while some 109 people were rescued. This is the latest in a series of accidents involving migrant boats. Last month, 50 migrants drowned off Tunisia, while 100 others were rescued. These incidents made organizations, including the Tunisian Red Crescent and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, on high alert. Volunteers are on standby to provide assistance to irregular migrants rescued by the Navy or Coast Guard.
We are working with other agencies, regional authorities, and the port administration to provide aid to survivors. At present, we are offering help to survivors in coastal regions such as Sarsis, and supplies, including water, have arrived.
And police have clashed with protesters in the Tunisian capital on Saturday, marching against the price increase of basic goods. They also demanded a reversal of price hikes that the Tunisian government has made through a program that lifts subsidies on basic products such as petrol, with the framework of a reform program stipulated by the IMF so that the country can obtain a new $4 billion loan. Tunisia is facing an ever-worsening economic crisis, exacerbated in part by the pandemic, which saw unemployment rise to 18% in the last year.
We want more investments to come to Tunisia, to maintain workers, water, education. People want work, health, and a good education. These important demands have been spoiled. The international companies went bankrupt. They left us nothing. Even the oxygen we breathe was reduced. Forests burn. The amount of water is in decline. Everything is in decline.
In Hungary, thousands of people have demonstrated in Budapest against a plan by Prime Minister Viktor Orban's government to build a campus of a top Chinese university in the city. Protesters have marched through the Hungarian capital to protest the proposed the proposed Fondant University campus, which is planned for the completion by 2024. According to a deal signed between Hungary and the Shanghai-based university's president, the campus, its first in Europe, will be around 500,000 square meters. But the project has sparked a diplomatic disagreement between Beijing and Budapest's liberal mayor.
The government wants to cancel the Student City project, which would have provided 12,000 dormitory places and 5,800 social housing units. This would pave the way to the Fondant University, which the government is building on credit with the help of Chinese companies and workers. We find this totally unacceptable.
The Belgian Prime Minister announced on Friday that travel restrictions this summer will be eased using the European COVID certificate.
The number one rule is that whoever comes back from a green or orange zone will not have to quarantine. But for those traveling to or from a red zone, it has been agreed that if you use the COVID certificate, there will be no quarantine either. That means that if you come back from a red zone, there will be no quarantine nor tests required when arriving in Belgium, on the condition that you are fully vaccinated for at least 2 weeks, or that you can present a negative PCR test less than 72 hours old, or that you can present a certificate proving that you recovered from coronavirus.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro criticized the United States for excluding his country from a vaccine donation program for developing countries.
Hamas Story has just declared that Joe Biden's government is going to donate vaccines to the world, but that they are not going to donate vaccines to Venezuela. They hate us, they think of us negatively, they are miserable. Hamas Story, you are miserable people who hate and despise Venezuela because we are rebels, we are Bolivarian, and we are going to continue being so, and Venezuela is going to have all your vaccines.
Cuban authorities announced on Friday the beginning of a massive vaccination campaign in Havana, where the domestically developed jab Abdala is already being applied to most vulnerable groups and neighborhoods. The aim is to achieve the full 3-dose immunization for the entire population of Cuba's capital by the end of July, the Minister of Public Health, José Ángel Portal Miranda, explained. According to the plan, all Havana residents will get at least one shot of Abdala by late June. Cuba has developed 5 COVID-19 vaccine candidates despite the severe limitations due to the U.S. blockade. Health authorities in India claim the country is on its way to recovery from the devastating second wave of COVID-19 infections. According to the government officials, weekly cases have fallen 63% from the peak in early May. However, restrictions have continued to be imposed in many parts of the country, including capital New Delhi, where most shops and marketplaces remain closed for more than a month. The Health Ministry warned the battle against the virus was not over and people must continue to follow appropriate behavior. A member of the National Institution for Transforming India said that the country had now overtaken the United States in terms of the total number of people who had received a first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. And we come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories in our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.